You're all set. Have a good meeting.
Thank you, Seth. Okay, we're gonna begin. Hello, everyone. I'm Corey Miles, your Scituate Coastal Resources Officer. I'm happy that you all joined on such a beautiful evening. Hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you have, or basically the agenda is to go over the beach nourishment project that happened over this, the late part of the winter, early part of the spring this year. And we have our engineer on who designed the project. His name is John Ramsey from Sustainable Coastal Solutions. And we also have our Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management on, just Jason Bertner and Rebecca Haney too, as well, to answer some questions. And they were the primary funding source for this project. So we thank you for that. I'm going to let John take over now. I think he's got privileges.
Yep. I hope I do. Yes.
Okay, there he is. All right.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, so as Corey mentioned, I'm just going to go over the construction of the project. I do want to give a little background for those of you who haven't been in these meetings before, just to give you an idea of what the goals of the project are and sort of looking down the road into the future. But basically, we did this nourishment project. It was a little bit late in the year. We have the ability to do this anytime from the fall all the way through the end of April. But basically this project was a partial project, and it was done right around mainly in March and April. So I will just go through a little bit of the project. It's just an overview here. And as Corey had mentioned, this project was a joint funding effort. Much of the money came from the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management through a coastal resilience grant, or actually two grants, so 2 years of grants for a total of $4 million. And the remainder of the money came from the town of Scituate for some of their resiliency money as well. If I don't figure out how to advance the slides, I'll be doing it really well. Okay, there we go. So just to give you some background, I want to point out that this type of nourishment that we did for this project is meant to be shore protection. This is not just for the purpose of recreation. I know a lot of you are probably enjoying the wider beach width that is there right now. But the real purpose of this is to build a wider beach. And one of the reasons for that is the damage that this area gets during major nor'easter storms. And just as an example here, in this area alone, there's been 75 homes that are considered repetitive loss properties, and those are properties that have had several significant damage claims to FEMA. And in all, since up through 2022 anyways, there were $11.4 million in damages just to residences through that program. And that likely underestimates by quite a bit, because a lot of people will just fix their homes and not make the FEMA claims, or this also doesn't look into things like some of the regrading and such that is required, or potentially some of the utility damages, et cetera, that happen because of the storms that come along the coast here. In addition to residential damage, there's obviously public infrastructure damage. This is just an example from one storm, just a very small stretch of shoreline. But basically, just during the winter storm Nemo in 2013, there's been so many storms that we probably are going to have to come up with new names sometime. But when it really comes down to, even from that one storm that most of us don't remember as anything all that significant, you're looking at in this area somewhere along the lines of $2 million of damages to public infrastructure. So it kind of gives you an idea of the numbers we're dealing with as far as what happens during the winter along the stretch of shoreline. I also want to just give a little bit of a historical reference. These are a couple pictures from the late 1800s, early 1900s of North Scituate Beach. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is you notice up along the seawall that there is what we call a rack line. That's kind of where the storm wave goes up to. And you notice it really doesn't reach the wall back then. Your beach was wide enough to make sure that the waves didn't run up to that area. And also on the bottom photograph, you see what the natural beach material was. This is, prior to any nourishment that was ever done in this system. And one of the things you notice is that there's a mixture of sand and gravel. That's an important thing about beach compatibility. In order for a beach to be stable in the environment that it's in, it's important to make sure that you put the proper size material down to make sure it doesn't erode any faster than the native beach, because that is a critical component to making sure that you have some longevity in your shore protection. And again, just going again to a historic photo, kind of getting that, as I said, that high water line. You'd see where the high water line rushed up the beach historically. And then obviously for anybody who's walked that beach over the last several or a couple decades at least, there really is no high tide beach, and in some cases no mid tide beach. So you really lose your access to the beach through a significant portion of the tide. And that's just looking north from basically the ramp there, looking north in 2016. So one of the things that happened back in the 1960s was the Army Corps had come around to several communities in the state, areas that were erosion prone, Revere, Scituate, Winthrop, and a couple others. And they actually did some dredging offshore. They would find a nearshore borrow site and they would pump sand up onto the beach, which they did in 1967. That was about 160,000 cubic yards. And just to give a scale, that's about 7,000 dump truck loads. But they did pump it from offshore, was something that was allowed at that time. And the only problem with them doing that is typically when they did those nourishment designs, if you see on the bottom left there, they just had a smooth slope going right up to the seawall, which is fine from a standpoint of being able to place the fill, but it doesn't necessarily have much longevity, especially since much of the material that is in the nearshore area, if you go further offshore, all of a sudden loses its gravel component that I pointed out is very necessary for the sustainability of this beach. And what you end up with is generally fine grained material. So while the Corps put that project down and the town got easements for all of that, and now has done a taking for all that, so that entire stretch you see there is now public beach. It is not something that lasted very well, and after a few years, that had actually disappeared, even though it was a very large volume of sediment. And so this gives you an idea of what that public easement looked like. And because of that public easement, that allowed us to come forward and design a beach nourishment, basically almost from Bailey's Causeway and then about 350 feet south of Mitchell Avenue, along Surfside there. So that whole stretch is public shoreline, which allows public money to be used without requiring any easements. That really does help facilitate trying to get a shore protection project in here, with the understanding that if we nourish this area, that the material is going to drift both south and north and protect neighboring shorelines as well. And just give you an idea of what beach nourishment, the general concept, and if any of you, I'm sure many of you have visited the state of Florida, most of the beaches along the Florida coast in any of the developed areas are artificially nourished. And one of the things that happens here on the top left there is kind of that narrow beach situation prior to a nourishment project. It means sea level, everything's happy, just like we have in the summer here in Scituate. But then when you do get a storm, that's the top right, if you have a narrow beach, the beach gets overtopped by storm surge and wave uprush, and there's damage to the infrastructure all along the shoreline. The purpose of the beach nourishment, usually this type of concept is to widen the beach, usually back to some position that it had been historically. And with that wider beach, you have a buffer so that when you do get storm surge, like we see on the bottom right, that same storm surge that we see above, the waves cannot uprush all the way to the infrastructure, and you have a nice buffer built up. This is obviously a bit different than your situation where you have a seawall, but the overall concept is the same. We're really trying to create a buffer between you and the seawall. Okay. Stuck here again. My forward is not working here. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Okay, so again, I talked about the purpose and need, and I want to really stress this, that this really is a shore protection project, and we're trying to reduce or eliminate damages to public infrastructure. And part of that, the reason for wanting to do that, especially in this area where we have a roadway that goes along the shoreline, we want to maintain the emergency access both during and after the storm events. And this can't be stressed enough, but the extending the life of the seawall is critical. For those of you who've lived there for quite a long time, one of the things you see over time is the beach is lowered, and that wider concrete footing of the seawall is becoming exposed. And that is really the last, or the bottom feature of the seawall. And if the beach continues to erode the way it has been, that continues to lower, and all of a sudden the seawall's integrity starts becoming a problem. Right now, the town is going through the process of getting FEMA money to repair some of the revetment along that shoreline north of the beach nourishment. But again, that's a very expensive thing to do, and that is only going to hold up for some time if the beach continues to lower. So it's really critical, in order to extend the life of the existing shore protection you have, to also maintain a beach in front of it. And the other thing, this is kind of we can always say matters never created or lost. In this case, we are putting sediment into the system. We anticipated, especially with the volume that we were able to place, that we knew that material was going to migrate both, updrift and mainly to the north, and downdrift mainly to south, and some offshore as well. But that does improve the sediment supply to those adjacent beaches, and that sediment supply does serve to provide additional protection to those neighboring beaches as well. And I've already mentioned the beach compatibility issue, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So just going to that concept of your the seawall situation on the left, that's that natural beach that I'd shown before, where as a natural beach system erodes, the whole profile migrates landward as your shoreline retreat. But there really is no change. It's just that your dune, et cetera, all the features are migrating landward. When we build a seawall on the right there, we're actually fixing the shoreline in place. And so if there's no other sediment supply coming in from updrift or offshore, what ends up happening over time is that you get the beach losses, that beach just erodes. And then what ends up happening is you get that lowering of the beach in front of the seawall. You can undermine the foundation, but you also get a lot more wave reflection off the seawall and a lot more wave overtopping of that seawall as well, causing damage to the road and other infrastructure above that. So that's just a kind of a quick thumbnail of the type of process that you certainly have here along Glades Road specifically. So the original project that we permitted is about 3,000 feet long, over half a mile. We originally intended it to be about 240,000 cubic yards, which is 12,000 truckloads, so even larger than an Army Corps project. And with a significant amount of trucks coming in every day, we could build that in about 6 months. And if we did a project that large, we would anticipate that would last on the order of about 10 years. And then after that, you may need to do partial renourishments, either in certain areas or just increase the elevation along the whole profile, once every 10 years or so. And that project from an aerial view would look something like this. And it would stretch from 74 Glades Road all the way down to 35 Surfside, which is basically the length of that easement or the taking that was done back in the 60s. And that beach would have a, right now, if you were out there, you saw us building a platform, and that platform is about 7 feet above the high tide line. That platform, in this case, if we'd done the full project, would have extended out 100 feet and then sloped gradually offshore into the existing profile. So overall, we'd be looking at something that would extend out about 300 feet past, beyond the seawall over that, over half-mile length of shoreline. And there's just an oblique view of what that might look like, just to give you kind of visualization of kind of the extent of it relative to the various features along the shoreline. And the lightest blue area is the area that would be subtidal all the time. That darker tan area would be the area that's intertidal, and then the light sand area would be the dry beach at all phases of the tide for that full length of beach. So based on the funding we had available, as I said, we had gotten 2 CCM grants, one for 2023, 2024 for $2 million. And then CCM came in with an extra $2 million for the 24 grant cycle. So we're able to really put together a pretty decent sized project. And we went through the process of coming up with that partial project and designing it. It's approximately 1,000 feet long. We had 52,000 cubic yards of material, about 2,600 truckloads. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we had the ability to do it over approximately 3 months, but the contractor, Sumco, actually came in because the bidding was held up a little bit. They actually came in early March and were able to complete the project before the end of April, which is the time we had to get out before fisheries issues came into play. So they were able to do the project in 2 months. And the nourishment material, in our case, ended up being a little bit more than 25% rounded gravel with no cobble. All the material was under 3 inches. Most of it was under 2 inches, and then about 70% sand. And this is what the original design of that project looked like. It's a kind of a fat, short project. But again, knowing very well that we're doing it in the winter time, or the late spring anyways, and obviously it's nor'easter season, and we knew as we were building it that we expected to have some losses, but also knowing that the way this was being built with a high berm, that those losses would likely move along shore, and the cross shore movement would be relatively limited. And the concept was to make sure that we were allowing that material to spread along the seawall and up at a high level so that we could get a high tide beach for the greatest distance possible, which again helps to mitigate storm damage and reduce wave energy approaching the seawall and revetment along that stretch of shoreline. On the bottom, you see what the profile looked like. I'd mentioned that it's 7 feet above mean high water. It's what's called 12 feet from the NAVD datum, which is about mean sea levels. It's 12 feet above mean sea level, and about, as I said, 7 feet above high water. And it was meant to have again, a 60-foot wide berm and then sloping off at 10-to-1 because it was a partial project. I did want to point out a little bit just about longevity of beach nourishments in general. If you double the length of a beach nourishment, you get 4 times the design life. So the bigger project you can do, the longer it's going to last. And we usually consider time for renourishment once you get down to somewhere around 30%. And again, this is just an example. This is not for your project, but it just gives the idea of, if you lengthened a beach nourishment to twice the length, you end up getting 4 times the lifespan. In our high energy area that we have here, we actually anticipate that the life, if this project were just left alone, would be less than that 3 years. But the anticipation with this was always going to be a phased project with the hope that funding would be available in out years to keep filling this so that we can have a project that has some longevity and continue to reduce storm damage along that stretch of shoreline. So I did want to talk about compatible sediment. These pictures are from the native beach in the winter. I know when you go out to the beach in the summer, it always looks nice and sandy because the offshore bar migrates on and provides that nice veneer of sand over the top. But in general, your beach is a mix of gravel size and sand material. And because of that gravel size material, when the sand does migrate offshore into that bar, that gravel material that people feel that comes up from underneath, it's actually just the veneer of sand is washed off the top. Those gravel bars serve to protect the upper beach and keep the longevity of that beach, or keep that beach intact during some of these major storm events. So it's a very critical component. And so when it comes to the winter, and if you saw the nourishment going in, after we had some of those wave events, you saw these gravel bars pop up out of the nourishment, but they were always part of the fill. And then, now most of them are covered up, but you'll definitely see that the material that was brought in is very similar to what you see on the native beach. And that mix is the same percentage of gravel and sand. And again, going back to historically, so people often ask us, like, well, the beach has just gotten more gravelly. It used to be sandy. It was probably sandy for that 1 year after the Army Corps project before it washed away because they put fine grained sand in. But if you look historically at a lot of the beaches in this area, they're all consist of a mix of gravel and sand. It's just what the native glacial materials are in this area that provide material to the beach. But again, they tend to be sandier in the summer and a little bit more gravelly in the winter, just because of the way the wave dynamics take the bar offshore and put it back on. So when we were putting together our specifications, trying to find a material that is exactly compatible with Scituate Beach is pretty much impossible. So you're really asking the contractor to come in and do a mix of sediment. This is just the mixing area down by the rotary. But you'll see that there's actually 3 distinct piles here. There's in the foreground, there's a coarser gravel pile. In the middle, there's a finer gravel pile, and then there's a much larger pile of sand. And they mixed that material together to bring it to the beach at the prescribed amounts to make sure that we got what was considered a compatible material that matched what we had found on the natural beach. And sort of what that looks like from a technical level, that curve is just, the left-hand side is 3 inches grain size, and the bottom here is fine sand. And so this is just one of the samples, and this just kind of shows that there's a distribution between gravel, and this is the percent of material that passes these various sieves when they're measuring it. But basically, when we get down to about the bottom of gravel, we had in this case about 35% gravel, and then the rest was sand. But that gray envelope is kind of where we allowed material. Most of the material came in along this finer side. So we were in the, somewhere, again, generally somewhere on the order of about 30% gravel, 70% sand for the whole project. The reason why this is important, just the influence of grain size, it's just a little animation here. So if I use material that's coarser than the native for my fill material up top, something of equal grain size in the middle, and finer fill material on the bottom, kind of like what the Corps did would be the bottom one back in the 60s. But I look at how it performs, the coarser fill will stand up better, but obviously it's going to end up forming a steeper beach and not really be similar to what you have there. So the beach would look more like what you see down at Egypt Beach if we went in to coarser material. If we use similar material, it ends up setting up to about the same profile that you have in the native beach, which is what we were trying to achieve here. And if I do finer material, I lose most of my beach, and a lot of it gets moved offshore. It's just the way the natural waves will move it. So we really are aiming to make sure our material is compatible, so we're getting something that is similar to the native beach. So we know that it's going to perform the way that the native beach has performed historically. So I just want to go through a series of drone photos, just giving you a kind of progress as the project was being constructed. The project was, started in early March. This is after about a week and a half of placement. We were bringing in two sites, one right at the boat ramp and one a few hundred feet up the way. But this is just showing the material going in and giving you an idea of really, one of the things to look at is all these rocks that are exposed, and also the very coarse material you have here that is down in the lower part of the beach, and also the staircase that is, basically kind of a jump down at the end. And then also seeing how much of this revetment here is exposed going down in this direction. Most of that area was not filled, but you'll see what the effect of sediment movement along the shore is as we go through these. So this is just a quick progress shot. So right at the beginning on the 5th, one of the things to point out is this rock here. So it looks like not much has been done because obviously we're in a fairly stormy period with very high tides. It looks like these guys aren't really making progress by the next day. But if you actually look at what the material is doing, it's actually drifting down, and all of a sudden all this area is buried. So even though it looks like there's not much was happening, there's quite a bit going on. We did have a lull in the weather a little bit on that next week, and got some really good visual as far as widening the platform pretty significantly over that next week. And this is on April 1st. I would point out that we did have a significant nor'easter on April 4th that really did a lot of damage to the project. But again, the material, it's just moving the material. And one of the things you see is, obviously, this is not native beach anymore. This is actually beach nourishment that has been washed out. You can see that we have a significant amount of gravel mixed in there with the sand. But again, this bleaches out very, very quickly when the tide comes up and takes it. One of the things you notice is that staircase is buried. And again, this is only 3 or 4 feet lower than the seawall at that location. Again, April 1st, a different view. And again, you'd see where the tide historically comes up to. But again, this is just a kind of right before that nor'easter that we had. And then just jumping all the way forward to what we're seeing now. We have some of this nourishment. Obviously the staircase is still buried. We do have a scarp here. It's a few feet high that people found a way to getting down. But again, this area is doing very well. But the high tide line now extends much further south, and much of this revetment going south from the project is buried. And the beach going north is also significantly higher for quite a ways, and that's what we expect to have happen, to have this material spread along the shoreline, but also spread down into the profile as this, what we call it, equilibrates with the shape of the profile, slides down and also laterally. And this is just looking north. Again, this beach, even up in this area, is quite a bit higher than it has been historically. And you can see actually down in front of the revetment, you can see that the high water line now only comes up to here, or historically, before we started the project, they had no high tide beach along any of that area, and our high tide beach now extends up to this area as well. So, overall, it's performing basically as we expected for the amount of material we had, but it is going to, there's going to be some more equilibration as we get some higher waves here to kind of straighten out that, or flatten out that scarp over time, and that will certainly happen. But again, with this, when we put the beach nourishment in with a certain slope, we try to estimate what the native slope is. But obviously, when we finish this off, it did have a bit steeper than what we had anticipated, and so we do get a bit of scarping, but that will flatten out over time. This is just a graphic showing how the beach nourishment basically as material is placed by the week, and this is elevation plots. So the red is up at the elevation of the nourishment, the target nourishment elevation. We start getting into the yellows, that's basically where the high tide line is. And there's really at the beginning of the project, you can see the fill starting to go in this area and then starting to fill in between. More major fill, again, fairly successful time period through that week. And again, into the next week, even more nourishment. So again, we got the red area, but one of the things to look at is the expansion of the yellow area. So this material is migrating in this direction as well as that direction and getting more high tide beach. So when it's brighter yellow, that means that at least for still water elevation, that the tide's not getting up there on a regular basis. And then we had nor'easter, minor nor'easter, which took some of the material away. But again, you see it more spreading. And then finally, right after the major nor'easter, we lost a lot of our berm, but a lot of that material just ended up migrating along the shoreline. And then finally, when the project was finished, we kind of see that high water shoreline extending for probably 1.5 to 2 times the actual length of the filled project. So overall, the project provided about 22% of what our full design was. And these bullets were actually from my expectations from the January meeting before we started construction, but they're exactly the same for what I want to reiterate now. We anticipated the beach would rapidly adjust or equilibrate to form a natural slope, which it did, and it also one of the things it appears that there's a rapid loss, but if you really look at how the elevation is changing to adjacent beaches, you realize the whole system is performing very well, and it's coming up in elevation, even though we didn't place material in many of those areas. We expected some scarping, and it's going to take some time for it to adjust. And that is something that beach nourishments are, unless you are coming in and doing the full project, and really making that effort to make sure it's very gradual slope offshore, where there's going to be some of that scarping. And it's just something that it's best to probably just let nature take care of, as long as it's not creating problems with access to the beach. And it looks like people have come up with a couple ramps there to get down on the beach. It seems to be doing fine. And as anticipated, the north and south ends of that beach were going to run more quickly, but you see that spreading the fill in the longshore direction. And I do want to reiterate that even though it may look like a lot of the material is gone, that beach material is still providing protection. But it's not only providing protection for where we place the fill, but it's also providing protection to both the north and primarily the south of where we placed it. And as far as kind of looking into our crystal ball into the future, this was always planned as a phased project, just because of the size and also the funding requirements. But there is potential opportunity to seek other funds from CCM. There's another grant round out now the town may be going after, and there may be other sources of funding down the road. So that's something the town can think about as to how they want to potentially look into continuing to make this beach, or try to get to the point where we are closer to the full design over time. So I just do want to point out, it's kind of just a graphical way of seeing what I've already said, but obviously we're putting a very kind of a point sticking out into the ocean, if you look at it that way. And because we have a slope that is slightly steeper than the perfect slope, because we don't want to try to fill out into the ocean, we want to let nature do its thing. We expect that cross-shore equilibration to make the profile settle down, and some of that material that's eroded off the face is going to end up in that offshore profile. And then we also are going to get these alongshore losses as natural waves want to make the shoreline straight and parallel. The waves hate a perturbation, so that's why you always see when you're a place like Point Ellerton up in Hull, or any of these points that stick out of the ocean, you always see the waves are much bigger there, because all the wave energy ends up being focused on anything that sticks out into the ocean. And I also want people to keep in mind the seasonal aspect of your beach. For those of you who do come there in the winter. One of the things you see the winter profile where you, especially at low tide, you can notice this, that you have the sand we pulled off the front and you'll get a gravelly beach in our case, but it moves out into a bar and you can see the waves breaking on that bar, especially at low tide during the winter here at this beach. And then the summer, that bar tends to get pushed on shore with the milder waves and the beach will widen. So you should expect that seasonal aspect to continue. But obviously with the new sediment in here, that bar may actually be even more pronounced come this next fall and winter. And this is just a kind of percent remaining curve. And this is what the original design, when we were looking at the potential options for phasing, how we would do it. This is, one project is done, and then a couple of years later, we do it the second pattern. And this was looking at 50% each time to try to make sure that we got the longevity out of the total project. Obviously, we only did about 20% based on the funding we had. But this is kind of the ability, kind of showing you the ability of phasing. So if you build a project, some of it starts eroding, you build it again, build more, and again, you're kind of hopscotching through time to try to maintain that shore protection over the long term for your project. And with that, I'm going to open up to questions. I didn't want to make this too long a presentation. I figure everybody's kind of seen the beach and seen what it does. And I don't know if either Corey or CCM have anything to add.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, John. So I think the way this is going to work is if you have a question or you want to make a comment, you can raise your hand if you know how to do that. And I'll unmute you and you can ask your question, or you can write it in the chat and we'll try to answer it that way as well. So I'll wait a minute and see if anybody raises their hand.
And Ms. Miles, you do have one hand raised, and just to educate people, if you're not familiar with how to raise your hand, you're just going to take your mouse and move it to the bottom of your screen. We'll see a reaction button. You just click that raise hand button in there. And Ms. Miles, you do have two hands raised. You okay?
Okay.
Yep.
Yep, I'm gonna, okay, Scott Greenbaum.
Hi. Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
got a couple of questions. One for CZM. Your funding is state funding, which means it's state tax money. Is that correct? CZM. So I want to know, because it's not town money, but it's still the residents of Scituate's tax money because it's state money. I want to make sure I understand that. The other thing is, how much is the estimate to finish the original full phase? And what is the estimate in year, looks like 7 or 8, to put the 70% back? Because it looks like we're looking at another $16 to $20 million and then spending another $16, $20 million in current funds every 7 or 8 years. This does not sound like a very sustainable process. Why aren't we putting really big rocks at the bottom of the seawalls so they don't bounce out? So that's my questions.
Okay, I can try to answer the second question first. And I'll let CZM address the state funding issue. So, having done this around the country, whether it's beach nourishment or revetment design or seawall design, I do all of those. I can tell you that revetments and seawalls are becoming more and more expensive. So if you start looking at the costs for redoing revetments and seawalls, as I said, these seawalls, certain portions of these seawalls along here are starting to get towards the end of their design life. And if you needed to do a full construction of the seawall, you're going to run into significantly higher expense than what you're talking about here. With that in mind, the concept of adding stone, again, I've been doing this a long time, and I've been seeing the the effect of that. There are certain places that where you put revetments, but one of the things that we're seeing over time, it is just a Band-Aid, and sooner or later, you're going to end up with a full replacement. If you have a softer solution like a beach nourishment, dune, whatever, in front of your seawall, the seawall will basically last forever because it's not getting impacted by waves. The foundation is not undermined. So, you know, it's up to the town to look at, you know, what the options are. And we had done a prioritization for the town back in 2016, I believe. In most of the areas in town, we suggested doing, you know, continuing to do the armory. This area gave us an opportunity to look at beach nourishment, and it is something that can work. And again, the longevity issue is an estimate. I usually estimate on the conservative side, if we did this project, it's highly unlikely that we would actually lose all that material. And I can point to Winthrop Beach up in Winthrop that was designed to have a 10-year design life. It is now 10 years, and about 75% of that beach is still in place. So, you know, I just, you know, again, I think you have to look at things a certain way, and also keep in mind that the material from this beach is at some point, if it does erode away, it's going to be benefiting other portions of the shoreline down at Egypt Beach, you know, even further along the ocean side eventually. So it's not something, you know, one of the things we've done is we've kind of locked up all the sediment supply by putting all these revetments in. And again, it's over time that is going to fail, you know, just by the longevity of it. It's not an if, it's a when. And so as I said, you know, if you go to Florida, they've embraced this concept. And the one thing I will say, they've also embraced the concept of doing these projects in a way that the federal government's actually chipped in to help them out and maintained their beaches. So we're all paying for it. So when you go to Florida, you're all paying for those beaches. But I mean, again, this is a concept that is pretty much accepted in the coastal engineering industry, not to make money for us, but as a more natural and better way of doing shore protection in the long run.
Yeah, thank you, John. And with regards to the funding for this project, it was a combination of state funds and of pass-through of federal funds through ARPA, I believe. So it was a combination of state and federal funds. To just kind of reinforce some of the things that John said, people have a perception that things such as seawalls and revetments are permanent structures. And once you put them in, you don't have to worry about them or maintain them anymore. That is incorrect. Anything that you put out there needs to be maintained. The town of Scituate is working with FEMA on about half a dozen coastal engineering structures that have been damaged over the years and are currently in need of either repair or significant replacement. As just one example, back in 2017, the town replaced a seawall and expanded a revetment on Oceanside Drive area, and that revetment is already unraveling. So it needs to be reconstructed or repaired. So even seawalls and revetments need almost constant attention. The one thing I would also point out, and this goes back to that slide that John presented at the beginning of his presentation, of the repetitive loss structures in this area as measured by FEMA payouts. And all of those structures, or the vast majority of those structures, are behind seawalls and revetments. So seawalls and revetments do a pretty good job of protecting the landform behind the seawall. They don't do a very good job of protecting structures behind the seawall from wave overtopping, which in this area is the primary mechanism for storm damage and flooding of backshore areas.
Okay, I see more hands raised, so I'm gonna try to go in the order that I saw them raised. Andrea, I'm gonna ask to unmute you, and you may go ahead.
Hi,
Hi.
thanks, Corey. Andrea Ramsey here. I just wanted to know, I'm assuming that we are already putting in a grant for a phase 2, but I was just curious what that progress is. It sounds like this has been really successful. So thank you, John, for giving a really good explanation of that. So I'm just curious what the next phases are, what the status of that might be, Corey.
Yes, we plan to apply for another round of funding from the Coastal Zone Management Program through their Coastal Resiliency Fund. The grant awards are limited to $2 million. So, and that requires a 10% match from the town. So that's the maximum we can go for and receive. So that's the plan for this next phase. Okay. Mary Ellen Schloss. I'm going to unmute you and go ahead. You may ask your question.
She may be muted.
All right, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everybody, and thank you for the presentation. That was really informative. So my question just is about turbidity, from the sand, and is there, we did see a lot of turbidity over the winter. There's still a lot of, sand out there that's going to eventually, obviously, get into the water column. So just wondering, is there any anticipation of how, whether what the turbidity increase will be like, and is there any concern about impact on the eelgrass beds that are in the water in the area?
Sure. So one of the things we try to make sure we do, if you saw the grain size curve, we try to make sure that this was less than about 2 to 3% fines. We can't make it without adding a huge amount of expense to try to wash the material before we stockpile it. But even then, you end up getting some fines anyways. So the idea is to get the fines down to a level which would be similar to any sort of sand placement project, whether it be done hydraulically or mechanically. You're always going to get a little bit of fines. But generally, the way this works is if we are putting the material down during a certain time period, we're doing it during the time period where we're not affecting fisheries. And if you look at the plume, so to speak, that we did see, it generally stayed in the nearshore area and dissipated relatively quickly over time. The other thing to point out, and I think one of the things that sometimes is lost, is that if you go down there, as a nor'easter is approaching or after a nor'easter, there's a lot of natural turbidity in our water anyways, from fines getting stirred up in deeper water. So the turbidity that we see coming off here on a calm day may look like it's very turbid water, but natural turbidity here is it's not excessive. Obviously, eelgrass can survive in certain areas off here, but eelgrass basically will not grow in anything much deeper than somewhere on the order of 30 feet, because our water clarity due to natural turbidity doesn't allow that. Where other areas further south, or you go down to Florida, the seagrasses can grow at a much deeper depth just because they have much less natural turbidity in their water column. But the fisheries agencies understand what we're doing, and they limit the time of year to try and make sure that we're avoiding any time of year that we're going to be directly impacting any fishery species in the near shore, with the understanding that it's also likely very protective of that near shore eelgrass as well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, I see one more hand raised. Edward Tursky. I am going to unmute you. Okay, you there, Edward?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
At the start of the project, there must have been several objectives that were set. Can you identify the top 1, 2, or 3 objectives that were stated to be done for this project?
Sure. If I didn't, so basically, what we were trying to do is we were trying to achieve the goal was to achieve a beach berm that was up at, as I mentioned, at 12 feet to the NAVD dam, or basically 7 feet above high water. We wanted to get that berm out to about 60 feet and then slope it offshore. But that objective is to basically allow formation of a high tide beach along that stretch of shoreline that would provide wave protection for the length of shoreline that we were able to do with the amount of funding that we had. But the goal was definitely to reduce wave energy at the seawall was the overall goal.
So can you estimate how much of all the sand and material has already been put down has already washed away?
I mean, we have surveys, and none of it has washed away. It is all in the profile either in the near shore or along the adjacent beaches, and it is performing that role to reduce wave heights approaching the seawall, both north and south, and in the footprint of the project.
And was there any objective or thought process that went to aesthetics?
Other than the fact that the material that we brought in was compatible with the beach, and with the understanding, as you saw in the pictures, and you see if you go down there, that once the waves get over and move that material around, that it blends in very well with the native beach. We basically brought in the material that was compatible, and that would be, as far as a aesthetic standpoint, that's what we're trying to do, is achieve what beach there is there. Keep in mind what the historic beach looked like as well. If you looked at those historic photos that I'd shown, that's what the native beach looked like prior to any beach nourishments being done there.
But my question on aesthetics is pleasing to the eye, fitting the natural landscape that already exists. Because this, in my mind, is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Also, where was the human interaction of this factored in? And the reason for that question is I was on the beach today, and I've already seen multiple areas where people have destroyed this buildup to make paths to get down to the water. And I just see that continuing, and we're not even really into beach season yet. So we have a human behavior issue that I don't know if that was ever accounted for, but it's seemingly preemptively destroying what you've built. And wondering again, back to the first question here, using massive boulders and maybe then covered with sand, it's tough to move those boulders.
And I will say that. I mean, so if you look at this nourishment, one of the things I pointed out at the initial slides is all those boulders you see scattered that had fallen out of the revetment are now buried in sand. So you're right, it's hard for those boulders to now move because they are buried in sand. As far as the human element, the people cutting paths down through here is not going to do any real effect on the way this performs. Again, I expect that scarp will flatten out once we have a wave event that can get up to the top of that. That's anticipated with what we're doing, and that material, again, it's not lost. It will spread out along the beach, and again, provide the function that we are intending. As far as your personal aesthetics, thinking that it's the ugliest thing, I mean, I guess I would point out to you that you have access to a beach that, I don't know when you went down today, but you may not have been able to walk that beach historically during the tide that you were at. because you didn't have any high tide beach. In some places you had no mid tide beach along that shoreline. So there has been a benefit as far as widening the beach, for a greater portion of the tide cycle. Not that that is necessarily the recreational aspect was I won't call it an afterthought, but it was not the purpose of the project. This is a coastal resiliency project. But because the material is compatible, it should blend in with what you've seen before on the beach, and the material is identical to what we found on the beach. So I would anticipate as that berm flattens out that people will forget that a nourishment was even done, other than that the beach is a bit wider than it used to be.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, I see one more hand raised. It's Scott Greenbaum, and I'm just wondering, Scott, is that left over from before? Or do you have a new question? I'm gonna unmute you.
No, I have a new statement to make.
Okay,
I
go ahead.
just heard that all the sand stayed in this beach nourishment location. During the storms, about a quarter mile offshore from at least this area, south of the lighthouse, there was a continuous stream of brown sandy water moving that direction. Sand Hill Beach looked like it did 25 years ago for about 2 weeks, and then it all disappeared. So telling me that none of this beach moved and was lost is disingenuous on your part. I mean, it's really difficult and not sustainable to try to put sand on a beach. And Winthrop, that you made the thing, this last winter took tremendous amount of damage because the waves were from the southeast, not the northeast. And they have a lot of problems. In Maine, on the southern coast of Maine, beaches that had never had any trouble before got wiped out because there was a southeast storm. So I think we need to find another solution, because this is not going to be sustainable. We can't be spending $20 to $30 million a year to try to keep the sea from coming in. I mean, and especially people that don't live directly on it, that are not going to lose their house to the ocean, are not going to support it. We're not going to be able to get funds from people because I don't lose a house to the ocean, but I pay the same percentage of the cost of this work. So I just don't understand. I mean, I understand the theory, but the theory doesn't meet the reality on the feet. This beach 25 years ago, you could walk on at high tide all the way from the ramp all the way to the other end. Sand Hills was filled. We could have sand. We're now at half tide, you're walking in gravel. The sand is going to disappear. And that's what's happening in Nantucket. They're losing the actual Nantucket is getting smaller, and they couldn't put enough sand there to keep it. Their lighthouse has been moved 2 or 3 times. Martha Vineyard has a problem. So the idea that the sand is staying there just doesn't meet what the actual observations are. And so that's that. And being disingenuous by telling us that the sand stayed there is not nice. It's not good. I know I was at the meeting in the January, and John, you said in 2 years this will be gone if we don't do the other $16 million worth of work. Why would I do something for 2 years worth of useful life at this price? I mean, we know that putting boulders out there take up a lot of wave action and power, and maybe it's time to start retreating, because I don't see anything in this thing about retreating. The houses along here are probably gonna be in the ocean in 20 years. So am I gonna put 40, $50 million on my, cost onto our tax rolls for something that's not gonna be here? And everyone has to admit, John, you have to admit that we are gonna be seeing bigger and bigger waves hitting it. Not that we're gonna have more intense storms, but the wave height is 1/2 the ocean depth. The ocean is getting deeper. And we're gonna have bigger waves and more action. So I just, it is disingenuous telling us that it's all stayed in this area, because it didn't. It washed. I haven't been down to, what is it, beach,
Egypt?
no, Egypt beach there's no sand on that. I haven't been down to the beach on, Peggy Beach is worse than it was in the beginning of the year. And I haven't been down to the beach, the other beach, now, sorry about it, the one south of it. See, maybe they have all the sand that you put, a good portion of the sand you put in the system. But I'm not feeding Marshfield beaches. I'm not feeding Duxbury beaches, but
I think we have a hard time getting past Scituate Harbor. But I think, I would ask you at least to look at the presentation. And when I'm saying that the material is in the area, I'm saying it's in the area. I'm not saying that it hasn't moved. And I think I was pretty clear about that. One of the things we are seeing is it's spreading along shore. And so that's one of the things I put this graphic up for, was just to show you basically how the surveys are showing that material is moving along shore, and it is elevating the beach in the longshore direction. I can't answer all of your questions, but I will agree with you that there are a lot of problems and there are a lot of erosion. The one thing that I would say with the boulder comment in the larger waves, one of the things that I have seen through my career is we have trapped a lot of sediment by building all these seawalls. Those were historically eroding shorelines. And we have by building these concrete seawalls and revetments, we have trapped that material and not allowed it to erode. And as I showed in that graphic, one of the things that happens when you do that is the beach in front of it lowers. And the reason why we get larger waves along these seawalls is because the beach is lower and the water depth at the toe during a storm is deeper, and that can support a larger wave. So if we continue to do the rock solution, I can tell you and that's the only thing we're trying to do, we will end up with the exact problem that you're concerned about, and the damages are going to get more and more severe. Again, I'm not saying, again, the cost of shore protection in Massachusetts is very high because of the environmental requirements, but it doesn't matter whether it's a revetment, seawall, beach nourishment, dune nourishment, etc. They're all going to be expensive. And the numbers here made this look like a more viable solution in the long run, because it does not only add sediment to the system and reduce the wave heights, but it's also protecting the existing infrastructure you have, the existing seawalls and revetments that exist there now. So I can't get into a tit for tat with you, but it's a more of a philosophical issue. And I'm not advocating for you guys doing beach nourishment. It's certainly up to the town and how they want to see things going forward. But from an engineering standpoint, beach nourishment is a sound approach to protecting the shoreline. And again, I am somebody who designs revetments and seawalls. And have certainly, if you look at the prioritization study that was done for the town, you'll see that we have different approaches. Like Peggy Beach, we did not recommend beach nourishment there. It does not make sense from a standpoint of cost benefit there with the number of houses and the ability to have a beach nourishment that's going to be lasting. So that's, again, I would suggest that you at least take a look at that study. I'm not saying you're going to agree with it, but it is another piece of information that I think would be valuable to you on your thought process.
Just one statement. If we hadn't built the revetments and the seawalls, the ocean would be 50, 100, 200 feet further inland.
Correct.
I mean, that's essentially what would happen, because the sand would have been moved away and eventually it would be gone. So, Yeah, no, we have to make an economic evaluation as a town because right now what we're doing is not sustainable. And the people that have the most at risk are not paying their fair share. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up at the moment. I'll give people a chance to go ahead and put your hand up if you have any other questions. Seeing none, I will ask to end the meeting. And we definitely want to extend our thank you to John Ramsey and Sustainable Coastal Solutions and the Coastal Zone Management Program for helping to put this together and provide the funding for it. John, thank you so much for all of your effort to provide us all this great information and recap all the construction details and everybody's observations. So have a good night.
Take care.